Aesop Fables for Children. Story of The Cock and the Jewel. A cock was busily scratching and scraping, about to find something to eat for himself and his family, when he happened to turn up a precious jewel that had been lost by its owner. "Aha," said the cock, "no doubt you are very costly, and he who lost you would give a great deal to find you. But as for me, I would choose a single grain of barleycorn before all the jewels in the world." The moral of the story is this: precious things are without value to those who cannot prize them. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of The Crow and the Pitcher. In a spell of dry weather, when the birds could find very little to drink, a thirsty crow found a pitcher with a little water in it. But the pitcher was high and had a narrow neck, and no matter how he tried, the crow could not reach the water. The poor thing felt as if he must die of thirst. Then an idea came to him. Picking up some small pebbles, he dropped them into the pitcher, one by one. With each pebble, the water rose a little higher, until at last it was near enough so he could drink. The moral of the story is this: in a pinch, a good use of our wits may help us out. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of The Dog and His Master's Dinner. A dog had learned to carry his master's dinner to him every day. He was very faithful to his duty, though the smell of the good things in the basket tempted him. The dogs in the neighborhood noticed him carrying the basket and soon discovered what was in it. They made several attempts to steal it from him, but he always guarded it faithfully. Then one day all the dogs in the neighborhood got together and met him on his way with the basket. The dog tried to run away from them, but at last he stopped to argue. That was his mistake. They soon made him feel so ridiculous that he dropped the basket and seized a large piece of roast meat intended for his master's dinner. "Very well," he said, "you divide the rest." The moral of the story is this: do not stop to argue with temptation. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of The Eagle and the Beetle. A beetle once begged the eagle to spare a hare which had run to her for protection. But the eagle pounced upon her prey, the sweep of her great wings tumbling the beetle a dozen feet away. Furious at the disrespect shown her, the beetle flew to the eagle's nest and rolled out the eggs. Not one did she spare. The eagle's grief and anger knew no bounds, but who had done the cruel deed she did not know. Next year the eagle built her nest far up on a mountain crag, but the beetle found it and again destroyed the eggs. In despair, the eagle now implored great Jupiter to let her place her eggs in his lap. There none would dare harm them, but the beetle buzzed about Jupiter's head and made him rise to drive her away, and the eggs rolled from his lap. Now the beetle told the reason for her action, and Jupiter had to acknowledge the justice of her cause. And they say that ever after, while the eagle's eggs lie in the nest in spring, the beetle still sleeps in the ground. For so Jupiter commanded. The moral of the story is this: even the weakest may find means to avenge a wrong. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of The Eagle and the Jackdaw. An eagle, swooping down on powerful wings, seized a lamb in her talons and made off with it to her nest. A jackdaw saw the deed, and his silly head was filled with the idea that he was big and strong enough to do as the eagle had done. So with much rustling of feathers and a fierce air, he came down swiftly on the back of a large ram. But when he tried to rise again, he found that he could not get away, for his claws were tangled in the wool. And so far was he from carrying away the ram, that the ram hardly noticed he was there. The shepherd saw the fluttering jackdaw, and at once guessed what had happened. Running up, he caught the bird and clipped its wings. That evening he gave the jackdaw to his children. "What a funny bird this is," they said, laughing. "What do you call it, father?" "That is a jackdaw, my children." But if you should ask him, he would say he is an eagle. The moral of the story is this: Do not let your vanity make you overestimate your powers. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Eagle and the Kite. An eagle sat high in the branches of a great oak. She seemed very sad and drooping for an eagle. A kite saw her. "Why do you look so woebegone?" asked the kite. "I want to get married," replied the eagle, "and I can't find a mate who can provide for me as I should like." "Take me," said the kite. "I am very strong, stronger even than you." "Do you really think you can provide for me?" asked the eagle eagerly. "Why, of course," replied the kite. "That would be a very simple matter. I am so strong I can carry away an ostrich in my talons as if it were a feather." The eagle accepted the kite immediately. But after the wedding, when the kite flew away to find something to eat for his bride, all he had when he returned was a tiny mouse. "Is that the ostrich you talked about?" said the eagle in disgust. "To win you I would have said and promised anything," replied the kite. The moral of the story is this: everything is fair in love. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Fighting Cocks and the Eagle. Once there were two cocks living in the same farmyard who could not bear the sight of each other. At last one day they flew up to fight it out, beak and claw. They fought until one of them was beaten and crawled off to a corner to hide. The cock that had won the battle flew to the top of the henhouse and, proudly flapping his wings, crowed with all his might to tell the world about his victory. But an eagle circling overhead heard the boasting chanticleer and, swooping down, carried him off to his nest. His rival saw the deed and, coming out of his corner, took his place as master of the farmyard. The moral of the story is this: pride goes before a fall. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Goose and the Golden Egg. There was once a countryman who possessed the most wonderful goose you can imagine, for every day when he visited the nest, the goose had laid a beautiful glittering golden egg. The countryman took the eggs to market and soon began to get rich, but it was not long before he grew impatient with the goose because she gave him only a single golden egg a day. He was not getting rich fast enough. Then one day, after he had finished counting his money, the idea came to him that he could get all the golden eggs at once by killing the goose and cutting it open. But when the deed was done, not a single golden egg did he find, and his precious goose was dead. The moral of the story is this: those who have plenty want more, and so lose all they have. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Hare and His Ears. The lion had been badly hurt by the horns of a goat, which he was eating. He was very angry to think that any animal that he chose for a meal should be so brazen as to wear such dangerous things as horns to scratch him while he ate. So he commanded that all animals with horns should leave his domains within 24 hours. The command struck terror among the beasts. All those who were so unfortunate as to have horns began to pack up and move out. Even the hare, who, as you know, has no horns and so had nothing to fear, passed a very restless night, dreaming awful dreams about the fearful lion. And when he came out of the warren in the early morning sunshine, and there saw the shadow cast by his long and pointed ears, a terrible fright seized him. "Goodbye, neighbor Cricket," he called. "I'm off. He will certainly make out that my ears are horns, no matter what I say." The moral of the story is this: do not give your enemies the slightest reason to attack your reputation. Your enemies will seize any excuse to attack you. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Hare and the Tortoise. A hare was making fun of the tortoise one day for being so slow. "Do you ever get anywhere?" he asked with a mocking laugh. "Yes," replied the tortoise, "and I get there sooner than you think. I'll run you a race and prove it." The hare was much amused at the idea of running a race with the tortoise. But for the fun of the thing, he agreed. So the fox, who had consented to act as judge, marked the distance and started the runners off. The hare was soon far out of sight, and to make the tortoise feel very deeply how ridiculous it was for him to try a race with a hare, he lay down beside the course to take a nap until the tortoise should catch up. The tortoise, meanwhile, kept going slowly but steadily, and, after a time, passed the place where the hare was sleeping. But the hare slept on very peacefully, and when at last he did wake up, the tortoise was near the goal. The hare now ran his swiftest, but he could not overtake the tortoise in time. The moral of the story is this: the race is not always to the swift. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Dog and His Reflection. A dog, to whom the butcher had thrown a bone, was hurrying home with his prize as fast as he could go. As he crossed a narrow footbridge, he happened to look down and saw himself reflected in the quiet water, as if in a mirror. But the greedy dog thought he saw a real dog, carrying a bone much bigger than his own. If he had stopped to think, he would have known better. But instead of thinking, he dropped his bone and sprang at the dog in the river, only to find himself swimming for dear life to reach the shore. At last he managed to scramble out, and as he stood sadly thinking about the good bone he had lost, he realized what a stupid dog he had been. The moral of the story is this: it is very foolish to be greedy. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Dog and the Oyster. There was once a dog who was very fond of eggs. He visited the henhouse very often, and at last got so greedy that he would swallow the eggs whole. One day the dog wandered down to the seashore. There he spied an oyster. In a twinkling, the oyster was resting in the dog's stomach, shell and all. It pained the dog a good deal, as you can guess. "I've learned that all round things are not eggs," he said, groaning. The moral of the story is this: act in haste and repent at leisure, and often in pain. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Dog in the Manger. A dog asleep in a manger filled with hay was awakened by the cattle, which came in tired and hungry from working in the field. But the dog would not let them get near the manger, and snarled and snapped as if it were filled with the best of meat and bones, all for himself. The cattle looked at the dog in disgust. "How selfish he is," said one. "He cannot eat the hay, and yet he will not let us eat it who are so hungry for it." Now the farmer came in. When he saw how the dog was acting, he seized a stick and drove him out of the stable with many a blow for his selfish behavior. The moral of the story is this: do not grudge others what you cannot enjoy yourself. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Dog, the Cock, and the Fox. A dog and a cock, who were the best of friends, wished very much to see something of the world. So they decided to leave the farmyard and to set out into the world along the road that led to the woods. The two comrades traveled along in the very best of spirits and without meeting any adventure to speak of. At nightfall the cock, looking for a place to roost, as was his custom, spied nearby a hollow tree that he thought would do very nicely for a night's lodging. The dog could creep inside, and the cock would fly up on one of the branches. So said, so done, and both slept very comfortably. With the first glimmer of dawn, the cock awoke. For the moment he forgot just where he was. He thought he was still in the farmyard, where it had been his duty to arouse the household at daybreak. So standing on tiptoes, he flapped his wings and crowed lustily. But instead of awakening the farmer, he awakened a fox not far off in the wood. The fox immediately had rosy visions of a very delicious breakfast. Hurrying to the tree where the cock was roosting, he said very politely, "A hearty welcome to our woods, honored sir. I cannot tell you how glad I am to see you here. I am quite sure we shall become the closest of friends." "I feel highly flattered, kind sir," replied the cock slyly. "If you will please go around to the door of my house at the foot of the tree, my porter will let you in." The hungry but unsuspecting fox went around the tree as he was told, and in a twinkling, the dog had seized him. The moral of the story is this: those who try to deceive may expect to be paid in their own coin. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Dogs and the Hides. Some hungry dogs saw a number of hides at the bottom of a stream where the tanner had put them to soak. A fine hide makes an excellent meal for a hungry dog, but the water was deep, and the dogs could not reach the hides from the bank. So they held a council and decided that the very best thing to do was to drink up the river. All fell to lapping up the water as fast as they could. But though they drank and drank until, one after another, all of them had burst with drinking, still, for all their effort, the water in the river remained as high as ever. The moral of the story is this: do not try to do impossible things. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Dogs and the Fox. Some dogs found the skin of a lion and furiously began to tear it with their teeth. A fox chanced to see them and laughed scornfully. "If that lion had been alive," he said, "it would have been a very different story. He would have made you feel how much sharper his claws are than your teeth." The moral of the story is this: it is easy and also contemptible to kick a man that is down. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Farmer and His Sons. A rich old farmer, who felt that he had not many more days to live, called his sons to his bedside. "My sons," he said, "heed what I have to say to you. Do not on any account part with the estate that has belonged to our family for so many generations. Somewhere on it is hidden a rich treasure. I do not know the exact spot, but it is there, and you will surely find it. Spare no energy and leave no spot unturned in your search." The father died, and no sooner was he in his grave than the sons set to work digging with all their might, turning up every foot of ground with their spades, and going over the whole farm 2 or 3 times. No hidden gold did they find. But at harvest time, when they had settled their accounts and had pocketed a rich profit far greater than that of any of their neighbors, they understood that the treasure their father had told them about was the wealth of a bountiful crop, and that in their industry had they found the treasure. The moral of the story is this: industry is itself a treasure. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Farmer and the Cranes. Some cranes saw a farmer plowing a large field. When the work of plowing was done, they patiently watched him sow the seed. It was their feast, they thought, so as soon as the farmer had finished planting and had gone home, down they flew to the field and began to eat as fast as they could. The farmer, of course, knew the cranes and their ways. He had had experience with such birds before. He soon returned to the field with a sling, but he did not bring any stones with him. He expected to scare the cranes just by swinging the sling in the air and shouting loudly at them. At first the cranes flew away in great terror, but they soon began to see that none of them ever got hurt. They did not even hear the noise of stones whizzing through the air. And as for words, they would kill nobody. At last they paid no attention whatever to the farmer. The farmer saw that he would have to take other measures. He wanted to save at least some of his grain. So he loaded his sling with stones and killed several of the cranes. This had the effect the farmer wanted, for from that day the cranes visited his field no more. The moral of the story is this: bluff and threatening words are of little value with rascals. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Farmer and the Snake. A farmer walked through his field one cold winter morning. On the ground lay a snake, stiff and frozen with the cold. The farmer knew how deadly the snake could be, and yet he picked it up and put it in his bosom to warm it back to life. The snake soon revived, and when it had enough strength, bit the man who had been so kind to it. The bite was deadly, and the farmer felt that he must die. As he drew his last breath, he said to those standing around, "The moral of the story is this: learn from my fate not to take pity on a scoundrel." Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Farmer and the Stork. A stork of a very simple and trusting nature had been asked by a gay party of cranes to visit a field that had been newly planted, but the party ended dismally with all the birds entangled in the meshes of the farmer's net. The stork begged the farmer to spare him. "Please let me go," he pleaded. "I belong to the stork family, who you know are honest and birds of good character. Besides, I did not know the cranes were going to steal." "You may be a very good bird," answered the farmer, "but I caught you with the thieving cranes, and you will have to share the same punishment with them." The moral of the story is this: you are judged by the company you keep. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Fighting Bulls and the Frog. Two bulls were fighting furiously in a field, at one side of which was a marsh. An old frog living in the marsh trembled as he watched the fierce battle. "What are you afraid of?" asked a young frog. "Do you not see," replied the old frog, "that the bull who is beaten will be driven away from the good forage up there to the reeds of this marsh, and we shall all be trampled into the mud?" It turned out, as the frog had said. The beaten bull was driven to the marsh, where his great hooves crushed the frogs to death. The moral of the story is this: when the great fall out, the weak must suffer for it. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Fisherman and the Little Fish. A poor fisherman, who lived on the fish he caught, had bad luck one day and caught nothing but a very small fry. The fisherman was about to put it in his basket when the little fish said, "Please spare me, Mr. Fisherman. I am so small it is not worthwhile to carry me home. When I am bigger, I shall make you a much better meal." But the fisherman quickly put the fish into his basket. "How foolish I should be," he said, "to throw you back. However small you may be, you are better than nothing at all." The moral of the story is this: a small gain is worth more than a large promise. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Flies and the Honey. A jar of honey was upset, and the sticky sweetness flowed out on the table. The sweet smell of the honey soon brought a large number of flies buzzing around. They did not wait for an invitation. No, indeed. They settled right down, feet and all, to gorge themselves. The flies were quickly smeared from head to foot with honey, their wings stuck together. They could not pull their feet out of the sticky mass, and so they died, giving their lives for the sake of a taste of sweetness. The moral of the story is this: be not greedy for a little passing pleasure. It may destroy you. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Fox and the Crab. A crab one day grew disgusted with the sands in which he lived. He decided to take a stroll to the meadow not far inland. There he would find better fare than briny water and sand mites. So off he crawled to the meadow. But there a hungry fox spied him, and in a twinkling ate him up, both shell and claw. The moral of the story is this: be content with your lot. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Fox and the Lion. A very young fox, who had never before seen a lion, happened to meet one in the forest. A single look was enough to send the fox off at top speed for the nearest hiding place. The second time the fox saw the lion, he stopped behind a tree to look at him a moment before slinking away. But the third time the fox went boldly up to the lion and, without turning a hair, said, Hello there, old top. The moral of the story is this: familiarity breeds contempt. Acquaintance with evil blinds us to its dangers. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Fox and the Stork. The fox one day thought of a plan to amuse himself at the expense of the stork, at whose odd appearance he was always laughing. "You must come and dine with me today," he said to the stork, smiling to himself at the trick he was going to play. The stork gladly accepted the invitation and arrived in good time and with a very good appetite. For dinner, the fox served soup. But it was set out in a very shallow dish, and all the stork could do was to wet the very tip of his bill. Not a drop of soup could he get, but the fox lapped it up easily, and to increase the disappointment of the stork, made a great show of enjoyment. The hungry stork was much displeased at the trick, but he was a calm, even-tempered fellow, and saw no good in flying into a rage. Instead, not long afterward, he invited the fox to dine with him in turn. The fox arrived promptly at the time that had been set, and the stork served a fish dinner that had a very appetizing smell. But it was served in a tall jar with a very narrow neck. The stork could easily get at the food with his long bill, but all the fox could do was to lick the outside of the jar and sniff at the delicious odor. And when the fox lost his temper, the stork said calmly, "The moral of the story is this: do not play tricks on your neighbors unless you can stand the same treatment yourself." Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Fox and the Crow. One bright morning, as the fox was following his sharp nose through the wood in search of a bite to eat, he saw a crow on the limb of a tree overhead. This was by no means the first crow the fox had ever seen. What caught his attention this time, and made him stop for a second look, was that the lucky crow held a bit of cheese in her beak. "No need to search any farther," thought sly Master Fox. "Here is a dainty bite for my breakfast." Up he trotted to the foot of the tree in which the crow was sitting, and looking up admiringly, he cried, "Good morning, beautiful creature." The crow, her head cocked on one side, watched the fox suspiciously. But she kept her beak tightly closed on the cheese and did not return his greeting. "What a charming creature she is," said the fox. "How her feathers shine! What a beautiful form and what splendid wings! Such a wonderful bird should have a very lovely voice, since everything else about her is so perfect. Could she sing just one song? I know I should hail her queen of birds." Listening to these flattering words, the crow forgot all her suspicion, and also her breakfast. She wanted very much to be called Queen of Birds. So she opened her beak wide to utter her loudest caw, and down fell the cheese straight into the fox's open mouth. "Thank you," said Master Fox sweetly, as he walked off. "Though it is cracked, you have a voice sure enough, but where are your wits?" The moral of the story is this: the flatterer lives at the expense of those who will listen to him. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Fox and the Goat. A fox fell into a well, and though it was not very deep, he found that he could not get out again. After he had been in the well a long time, a thirsty goat came by. The goat thought the fox had gone down to drink, and so he asked if the water was good. "The finest in the whole country," said the crafty fox. "Jump in and try it. There is more than enough for both of us." The thirsty goat immediately jumped in and began to drink. The fox just as quickly jumped on the goat's back and leaped from the tip of the goat's horns out of the well. The foolish goat now saw what a plight he had got into, and begged the fox to help him out. But the fox was already on his way to the woods. "If you had as much sense as you have beard, old fellow," he said as he ran, "you would have been more cautious about finding a way to get out again before you jumped in." The moral of the story is this: look before you leap. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Fox and the Grapes. A fox one day spied a beautiful bunch of ripe grapes hanging from a vine, trained along the branches of a tree. The grapes seemed ready to burst with juice, and the fox's mouth watered as he gazed longingly at them. The bunch hung from a high branch, and the fox had to jump for it. The first time he jumped, he missed it by a long way. So he walked off a short distance and took a running leap at it, only to fall short once more. Again and again he tried, but in vain. Now he sat down and looked at the grapes in disgust. "What a fool I am," he said. "Here I am wearing myself out to get a bunch of sour grapes that are not worth gaping for." And off he walked very, very scornfully. The moral of the story is this: there are many who pretend to despise and belittle that which is beyond their reach. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of The Fox and the Hedgehog. A fox, swimming across a river, was barely able to reach the bank, where he lay bruised and exhausted from his struggle with the swift current. Soon a swarm of blood-sucking flies settled on him, but he lay quietly, still too weak to run away from them. A hedgehog happened by. "Let me drive the flies away," he said kindly. "No, no," exclaimed the fox, "do not disturb them. They have taken all they can hold. If you drive them away, another greedy swarm will come and take the little blood I have left." The moral of the story is this: better to bear a lesser evil than to risk a greater in removing it. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of The Fox and the Leopard. A fox and a leopard, resting lazily after a generous dinner, amused themselves by disputing about their good looks. The leopard was very proud of his glossy, spotted coat and made disdainful remarks about the fox, whose appearance, he declared, was quite ordinary. The fox prided himself on his fine, bushy tail with its tip of white, but he was wise enough to see that he could not rival the leopard in looks. Still, he kept up a flow of sarcastic talk, just to exercise his wits and to have the fun of disputing. The leopard was about to lose his temper when the fox got up, yawning lazily. "You may have a very smart coat," he said, "but you would be a great deal better off if you had a little more smartness inside your head and less on your ribs, the way I am. That's what I call real beauty." The moral of the story is this: a fine coat is not always an indication of an attractive mind. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of The Fox and the Monkey. At a great meeting of the animals who had gathered to elect a new ruler, the monkey was asked to dance. This he did so well, with 1,000 funny capers and grimaces, that the animals were carried entirely off their feet with enthusiasm, and then and there elected him their king. The fox did not vote for the monkey, and was much disgusted with the animals for electing so unworthy a ruler. One day he found a trap with a bit of meat in it. Hurrying to King Monkey, he told him he had found a rich treasure, which he had not touched because it belonged by right to His Majesty the monkey. The greedy monkey followed the fox to the trap. As soon as he saw the meat, he grasped eagerly for it, only to find himself held fast in the trap. The fox stood off and laughed. "You pretend to be our king," he said, "and cannot even take care of yourself." Shortly after that, another election among the animals was held. The moral of the story is this: the true leader proves himself by his qualities. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of The Fox and the Pheasants. One moonlight evening, as Master Fox was taking his usual stroll in the woods, he saw a number of pheasants perched quite out of his reach on a limb of a tall old tree. The sly fox soon found a bright patch of moonlight where the pheasants could see him clearly. There he raised himself up on his hind legs and began a wild dance. First he whirled round and round like a top, then he hopped up and down, cutting all sorts of strange capers. The pheasants stared giddily. They hardly dared blink for fear of losing him out of their sight a single instant. Now the fox made as if to climb a tree. Now he fell over and lay still, playing dead, and the next instant he was hopping on all fours, his back in the air and his bushy tail shaking so that it seemed to throw out silver sparks in the moonlight. By this time, the poor birds' heads were in a whirl, and when the fox began his performance all over again, so dazed did they become that they lost their hold on the limb and fell down one by one to the fox. The moral of the story is this: too much attention to danger may cause us to fall victims to it. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of The Frog and the Mouse. A young mouse in search of adventure was running along the bank of a pond where lived a frog. When the frog saw the mouse, he swam to the bank and croaked, "Won't you pay me a visit? I can promise you a good time if you do." The mouse did not need much coaxing, for he was very anxious to see the world and everything in it. But though he could swim a little, he did not dare risk going into the pond without some help. The frog had a plan. He tied the mouse's leg to his own with a tough reed. Then into the pond he jumped, dragging his foolish companion with him. The mouse soon had enough of it and wanted to return to shore, but the treacherous frog had other plans. He pulled the mouse down under the water and drowned him. But before he could untie the reed that bound him to the dead mouse, a hawk came sailing over the pond. Seeing the body of the mouse floating on the water, the hawk swooped down, seized the mouse, and carried it off, with the frog dangling from its leg. Thus, at one swoop, he had caught both meat and fish for his dinner. The moral of the story is this: those who seek to harm others often come to harm themselves through their own deceit. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of The Frogs and the Ox. An ox came down to a reedy pool to drink. As he splashed heavily into the water, he crushed a young frog into the mud. The old frog soon missed the little one and asked his brothers and sisters what had become of him. And Tappin, "A great big monster," said one of them, "stepped on little brother with one of his huge feet." "Big, was he?" said the old frog, puffing herself up. "Was he as big as this?" "Oh, much bigger," they cried. The frog puffed up still more. "He could not have been bigger than this," she said. But the little frogs all declared that the monster was much, much bigger, and the old frog kept puffing herself out more and more, until, all at once, she burst. The moral of the story is this: do not attempt the impossible. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of The Frogs Who Wished for a King. The frogs were tired of governing themselves. They had so much freedom that it had spoiled them, and they did nothing but sit around croaking in a bored manner and wishing for a government that could entertain them with the pomp and display of royalty, and rule them in a way to make them know they were being ruled. No milk and water government for them, they declared, so they sent a petition to Jupiter asking for a king. Jupiter saw what simple and foolish creatures they were, but to keep them quiet and make them think they had a king, he threw down a huge log, which fell into the water with a great splash. The frogs hid themselves among the reeds and grasses, thinking the new king to be some fearful giant. But they soon discovered how tame and peaceable King Log was. In a short time, the younger frogs were using him for a diving platform, while the older frogs made him a meeting place where they complained loudly to Jupiter about the government. To teach the frogs a lesson, the ruler of the gods now sent a crane to be king of Frogland. The crane proved to be a very different sort of king from old King Log. He gobbled up the poor frogs right and left, and they soon saw what fools they had been. In mournful croaks, they begged Jupiter to take away the cruel tyrant before they should all be destroyed. "How now?" cried Jupiter. "Are you not yet content? You have what you asked for, and so you have only yourselves to blame for your misfortunes." The moral of the story is this: be sure you can better your condition before you seek to change. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Gnat and the Bull. A gnat flew over the meadow with much buzzing for so small a creature and settled on the tip of one of the horns of a bull. After he had rested a short time, he made ready to fly away. But before he left, he begged the bull's pardon for having used his horn for a resting place. "You must be very glad to have me go now," he said. "It's all the same to me," replied the bull. "I did not even know you were there." The moral of the story is this: we are often of greater importance in our own eyes than in the eyes of our neighbor. The smaller the mind, the greater the conceit. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Goatherd and the Goat. A goat strayed away from the flock, tempted by a patch of clover. The goatherd tried to call it back, but in vain. It would not obey him. Then he picked up a stone and threw it, breaking the goat's horn. The goatherd was frightened. "Do not tell the master," he begged the goat. "No," said the goat, "that broken horn can speak for itself." The moral of the story is this: wicked deeds will not stay hid. Aesop Fables for Children. Story of the Goatherd and the Wild Goats. One cold, stormy day, a goatherd drove his goats for shelter into a cave, where a number of wild goats had also found their way. The shepherd wanted to make the wild goats part of his flock, so he fed them well. But to his own flock, he gave only just enough food to keep them alive. When the weather cleared and the shepherd led the goats out to feed, the wild goats scampered off to the hills. "Is that the thanks I get for feeding you and treating you so well?" complained the shepherd. "Do not expect us to join your flock," replied one of the wild goats. "We know how you would treat us later on, if some strangers should come as we did." The moral of the story is this: it is unwise to treat old friends badly for the sake of new ones.